These images conceal memories. Beneath Hollywood's familiar stories lies a hidden history of persecution and murder which haunted a small group of men, not American cowboys, but Jewish immigrants. This is the story of the founders of Hollywood, the story of the idea that became their America, and ours. First saw light on a Hollywood screen. It was largely the product of 6 movie studios established in the 1920s and run for over 30 years by a group of Jewish immigrants. They had strikingly similar backgrounds.
All races and religions, that's America to me.
All of these men who founded Hollywood were born within a 500-mile radius of one another. And all of them wound up roughly within 15 miles of one another in Los Angeles. One could say that the American dream was really born in Eastern Europe.
Here we are. This is the Warner Studio.
Gee, I've never been so thrilled in all my life.
Harry Warner, who with 3 of his brothers brought sound to the motion picture, was born in Poland.
Comes Jack Warner, youngest of the Warner clan, and then the senior member of the film-famed brothers.
Also from Poland was Samuel Goldwyn, born Goldfish. Although Goldwyn never ran a major studio, he was perhaps the biggest and best known of the independent Hollywood producers. Universal founder Carl Laemmle came from a small town in Germany. Louis B. Mayer, who gave us the glory years of the MGM studio, was born in a Russian Jewish village. William Fox and Paramount's Adolf Zucker were both born in Hungary. Fox's studio merged with 20th Century Pictures to form 20th Century Fox.
Here comes Adolf Zucker, the president of Paramount Pictures.
Zucker, known as the father of the feature-length film, spent his childhood in this Jewish village. Prior to the 20th century, most Eastern European Jews were forced to live in poor villages called shtetls. Without a homeland, they lived a marginal existence at the sufferance of the Russian Tsar.
Rabbi, may I ask you a question?
Certainly, Leibish.
Is there a proper blessing for the Tsar?
A blessing for the Tsar, of course. May God bless and keep the Tsar far away from us.
In these villages, religion and life were intertwined. Everyone spoke Yiddish, the Germanic language of the shtetl. These towns were alive with Yiddish songs, storytelling, theater, and humor that would eventually find their way to America. This rich cultural life insulated the shtetl Jews from their misery and the often hostile reality around them.
The Hollywood movie moguls and their parents came from a place which was like a colossal pressure cooker. The Pale of Settlement in the Russian Empire was the only place where Jews could live legally under the Tsar. They had a very marginal existence, lived in poor villages. There was a tremendous degree of overpopulation. People were constantly migrating around this area. It really was the equivalent of a sort of huge Indian reservation. Not only were people poor, but there were very few things that they could do to earn a livelihood. Their neighbors were often violent. There were tremendous constraints on Jewish life and also a real sense of vulnerability.
Without warning, death could come crashing down on the defenseless shtetls, reminding the Jews that as a people they were permanent outsiders, vulnerable and powerless. Before the turn of the century, hundreds of thousands died in pogroms, massacres of Jews.
Suddenly, neighbors kept running out of the front of their house yelling, "The Huliganas, Huligana, the hooligans are here." Cossacks. They broke down the gate and they came in on horseback, on foot, wielding swords. And my oldest brother and my father each grabbed one of those clubs and they went out swinging. Fortunately, they came back, but there were a few people killed. This was the pogrom, and I lived through it.
This is where the founders of Hollywood came from. This is what they were fleeing and why they came to America. These harrowing experiences are reflected in many Hollywood films. Again and again, images of the rampaging oppressor, of the slaughter of the innocent, and of homes laid waste by fire make their way into American movies. For the shtetl Jews in the late 1800s, life was a series of rapes and murders. Many decided not to wait for a cavalry that would never come.
For the Jews of Eastern Europe, there were three ways to flee. The first was to stay where you were and participate in some Marxist or socialist movement where you could become part of a labor organization that would in turn create a great regime, a socialist regime in which Jews could be accepted as equals. A very small minority began to dream about Palestine. Very small numbers of people became Zionists. You needed a great deal of ideological dexterity to talk yourself into getting on a boat and going to Palestine at the turn of the century. The vast majority of Jews, 2 million out of 2.5 million, who left Eastern Europe to find their dream, went to America. The smart money was on America. It was the simple place where you could imagine the dream of Jews having both opportunity for tolerance and also economic security.
For Jews, this was a migration forever. They had no positive views of life in the old world. Many immigrants, in fact, talked about the last moment in Russia where they turn around and spit. In a way, we might even say that they actually became American, or they began the process of Americanization at the moment when they decided to leave, because they knew that there was no going back.
Among these immigrants were the future founders of the studios. They came with little money and few belongings, but they brought with them a new vision of America. Hollywood was a dream dreamt by Jews who were fleeing a nightmare. When they landed in America, the Jews expected to find a place where the little guy could make it to the top. Instead, they found a Protestant elite whose mission was to educate the immigrants and keep them in their place.
The dream with which the Jews came to America was very quickly frustrated. They couldn't get into financial services. They could work for slave wages. They couldn't live in the good neighborhoods. They could live in tenement slums. And it didn't take long before a great number of them began to once again fantasize about what it would really mean to realize the original dream.
Many of the future moguls had fathers who failed to adjust in the new world. At a very early age, they became the family breadwinners. They developed an unrelenting desire to make it. to succeed in the America that existed somewhere beyond the Jewish ghettos.
Jews couldn't be in banking. They were shut out of that. There were quota systems to get into Harvard, into almost any medical school or whatever. Any business or profession that was thought to be honorable was in some way or other excluded to Jews. So that they went into businesses that were, in a sense, outside of this system of dominance.
Hollywood's future founders quickly distinguished themselves as risk-takers and innovators. Adolf Zucker made his first fortune with the invention of a fox stole, with a clasp inside the fox's mouth.
The first moguls tended to come from various aspects of the sales business. Dry goods sales, Laemmle was a clothier, Goldwyn was a glove salesman, Adolf Zukor in furs, Louis Selznick in the diamond business. And as they approached the motion picture industry, they approached it not from an engineering point of view, not from technology or machinery, but from how they can distribute a product.
You really can't stress too much how pervasively Jewish the movie industry was in New York before World War I. Not that Jews were making movies or acting in movies, but there probably would not have been an extended Jewish family in New York at that time who did not have some relatives involved in some aspect of the movie industry, which was really a mom-and-pop industry of storefront theaters in not very elegant neighborhoods.
My dad was president of Paramount for almost 30 years. The way he got into the business was quite wonderful. My grandmother, who raised 8 children in 2 rooms above a fish and produce market in a Jewish ghetto in Chicago called Maxwell Street. She came rushing and said, Bonnie, you have to come here quickly. I have the most wonderful business. And she was going on and on and on. And she got him on a trolley car and took him to a kind of storefront Nickelodeon theater. And on the way there, she told him that this was the greatest business in the world because the people paid the money before they got the goods.
Sam ran the projector, and Abe fed the film through it. Harry collected the money, and Jack's assignment, Jack was only like 12 or 13 at the time, but he was singing. He had a nickname, Leon Zuardo. That's what he named himself. I don't ask me how. Anyway, so he was used to chase the audience out of the theater after the show was over, because a lot of times they'd want to stay.
At the turn of the century, movies reflected the vision of America shared by Thomas Edison and the other men who invented the film industry. Most of these old stock Protestants saw film as an amusement for the working classes. The films presented negative images of hook-nosed Jews, blacks, and others. They championed an idea of America where the white upper classes ruled and immigrants knew their place.
Take one movie, just one movie. Biographs, The Fights of Nations. The Jews meet on the street and a policeman comes up to run off one of them who's peddling neckties. One of the other Jews pulls out money and hands it to the policeman as a bribe to let his friend sell the neckties. There is a thread connected to the money, so as the cop walks away smugly, the money pops out of his pocket back into the Jew's pocket. They're petty merchants, they jabber, and they corrupt cops. It's all so perfect. The blacks, they're in a saloon, and a fight ensues in which a huge razor is pulled. So that blacks dance, they fight over women, and they fight with razors. Then 2 Scotsmen fight nobly with courage and dignity. Then it cuts to the end, and the ethnic groups that are thought to be noble come out into a kind of tableau. John Bull comes out and shakes hands with everybody. Johnny Reb from the Confederacy comes out and takes a bow. The Scotsman comes out and takes a bow. And finally, Uncle Sam comes out and takes a bow. No Jews, no blacks. In effect, immigration has happened, but until the immigrants and the blacks learn what it's like to be old stock, they're not really in it yet.
The highest artistic achievement of pre-Jewish American cinema was the box office hit Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffith. The explicitly racist story glorified the Ku Klux Klan and played on white America's fear of racial intermixing. These films reflected popular American values of their era. Ironically, they were being shown in Jewish-run theaters to audiences of Jews and other immigrants. Independently of each other, the Warner Brothers, Zukor,
intermarriage, the whole idea of inter-ethnic romance. Now, why do they do that? First of all, because love is a very democratic ideal. It knows no borders, it knows not riches, it knows not tradition, it knows simply the matters of the heart. In addition to that, when a Jew can marry a non-Jew, particularly part of the establishment culture, that's really a wonderful indication of how far up into society Jews have come.
This is where a producer lives. Not just any producer, but one of the most famous of them all. Samuel Goldwyn, high up on one of Beverly's hills.
Good morning.
Well, here is Mr. and Mrs. Samuel Goldwyn. And do you mind if I call you Francis and Sam?
I like that very much.
Sam, I understand that while you're the boss in the studio, that there's another...
This is the boss here.
It's her house, isn't it?
Every bit of it.
Let's talk to Francis then. How long have you lived here?
Oh, it's so long. 25, 26 years.
Sam, how'd you happen to pick this hilltop site out? Because of the view?
She picked it out.
And you bought it?
She liked it. The idea is to have her like it. That's all that's necessary for me.
It's fun to live in Beverly, isn't it?
We like Beverly very much.
And we're delighted you're both citizens of our town.
Tickets for 2, you mean for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Where you all going?
Hollywood! Hollywood!
When Jews came to America, it wasn't only Mayflower wasps who seemed to embody America to them. American blacks were quintessential Americans. I mean, that was one of the things that made America America, the presence of black people. And the indigenous African American culture was of tremendous interest. I mean, the music, the dancing, the popular styles, and so on.
The Hollywood Jews may have wanted to marry into white America, but when it came to music, Jewish composers looked to black America. Harold Arlen, the son of a liturgical singer or cantor, became one of the foremost popularizers of the blues.
Stormy weather, since my man and I ain't together, keeps raining all the time.
Jews served as messengers, in essence, of black culture. They took it, they consumed it, they integrated it into their own cultural repertoire, and then introduced it to white America that was essentially willing to listen to Jews and to partake of what Jews had to offer in a way that they never would from blacks.
First on Broadway, and later in the Hollywood musical, this was the way Jewish music often sounded.
Lost his way, but now he's coming back to stay. I tell you, little black sheep, come back home. We'll sing what's right and full. Children falling in through the door, he's saving the ball once more.
In writing lyrics, they turned to their Jewish immigrant concerns of people needing to belong somewhere, needing some kind of redemption through America. The Jews took these themes, but instead of putting them to Jewish music, they borrowed black forms that they saw as authentically American. In a sense, they wrote music in blackface.
Shepherd told him through the door, and he saved him the fold once more.
From the beginning, though they indulged in stereotypes, the Hollywood moguls took a different view of African Americans than that of the pre-Jewish filmmakers. Birth of a Nation had played on the white fear of the mixing of the races. In dramatic contrast in the film Showboat, the white male lead literally internalizes the blood of his black wife.
What are you doing with that knife? I'm not going to hurt her, you fool. Leave me be. I know what I'm doing. It won't hurt much, darling.
The Hollywood Jews wanted to be accepted as Americans. Their films advocated assimilation, not just for Jews, but for everyone. They believed that if you were prepared to pay the price and shed your identity, then America should be prepared to accept you.
I have an unpleasant duty. I understand that you have a miscegenation case on board.
What's it mean, Mom?
How's that? A case of a Negro woman married to a white man. A criminal offense in this state.
No such thing on board this boat.
The name of the white man is Steve Baker. The name of the negress is Julie Dozier.
You wouldn't call a man a white man that had Negro blood in him, would you?
No, I wouldn't. Not in Mississippi. One drop of Negro blood makes you a Negro in these parts.
Well, I got more than a drop of Negro blood in me, and that's a fact.
What's the trouble, ma'am?
In Hollywood, Jews trying to pass as Gentiles made films about blacks passing as whites. In Pinky, we see just how precarious that strategy is. For the outsider, things can turn in an instant.
What about her, ma'am? Now, if she even so much as thought of threatening you, we want to know about it. Or if she give you any of her impudence. Shut up, girl.
Oh, excuse me, sir, but why are you two white men mamming her? She's nothing but a low-down colored gal. Tried to steal my man.
Make him stop! Make him stop!
You heard what she said. He's got to slap her down. Unless it's true.
Yes, it's true. I'm colored. My grandmother's Mrs. Dicey Johnson.
Mrs. Dicey Johnson. I ought to slap them both down, Chief. Now, hold it.
Well, I think I'll be going now.
Go. You ain't going anywhere till I tell you. Get in that car.
You mean I'm under arrest?
What do you think?
On what charges are you holding?
You heard what I said. Get in that car.
One of the things that made American films so exportable is that anyone, anywhere could identify with so many of the themes of American movies. One of which was the idea of the outsider, which was a Jewish theme. Jews being outsiders, making films about outsiders. You see this even in monster pictures. I mean, King Kong. There's a film about, an outsider. And yet, it's the monster, if you want to call King Kong that, with whom the audience sympathizes.
In Hollywood, every outsider could be transformed into an insider. Even in appearance, Carl Laemmle was an outsider. He resembled an elf. Not surprisingly, Universal's films often championed marginal beings who were persecuted like the Jews of Europe. At Warner Brothers, the Jewish sensibility expressed itself by an identification with the little guy. The prize fighters and the losers, the loners and the gangsters. At Harry Cohn's Columbia, The emphasis was not on the outsider, but on the common man. Here the street-smart Clark Gable lectures the upper classes, represented by Claudette Colbert.
You're in a jam, and all you can think of is your money. It never fails, does it? Ever hear of the word humility? No, you wouldn't. I guess it never occurred to you to just say, "Please, mister, I'm in trouble. Will you help me?" No, that'd bring you down off your high horse for a minute. Well, let me tell you something. Maybe it'll take a load off your mind. You don't have to worry about me. I'm not interested in your money or your problem. You, King Wesley, your father, you're all a lot of hooey to me.
Zucker's Paramount didn't put down the rich. Instead, the studio whisked audiences into a once inaccessible universe of sophistication and luxury.
Qu'est-ce que vous voulez que ça puisse m'exciter? Moi je trouve tout très très bien. Si les plumes pendaient et que les taureaux donnent du lait, qu'est-ce que vous voulez que ça puisse m'épater? Moi je trouve tout très très bien.
When it came to class for the masses, nobody outdid Louis B. Mayer's MGM. Everything glittered with quality and style, reflecting the vision of the man at the helm.
Mr. Mayer was very persuasive. It's about the only word I could use. And so he'd stand there and he'd watch what was going on and he'd say, "No, just wait a minute, stop that." He says, "That's not the way to do it. I'll show you how it should be done." And he'd really go through the scene very well. It was everybody, and they never knew when he was going to walk in on them. They were very leery of him, the directors, because they never knew when Louis was going to walk down there and say, "No, that's not the way I want it." See, he was a perfectionist. He knew what he wanted, and money was no object. At Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, price meant nothing. It was to be the best.
In creating the great movie musical, Hollywood adapted the Broadway musical, an original American art form almost wholly created by fellow immigrant Jews. The music and lyrics were often based on classic stories, reinterpreted from a Jewish perspective.
Almost all of the writing pairs that have come to epitomize Broadway have been Jewish, whether it's Lerner and Loewe and Rodgers and Hammerstein, Jerome Kern. Almost all of them have been Jewish, with the exception, I think, of Cole Porter, really, here. And if you look at their plays, none of them, with the exception of Fiddler on the Roof, are about overtly Jewish themes, but all of them are about overtly Jewish concerns. So take a play like My Fair Lady. That's really about fitting in.
Again.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
I think she's got it. I think she's got it.
The rain in Spain stays mainly in the plain.
By George, she's got it. By George, she's got it. Now once again, where does it rain?
On the plain.
She's an immigrant into that culture, that upper middle class culture. She needs to learn how to talk, something immigrants are very concerned with. She needs to know how to dress. She needs to know the codes and conventions of society.
Bravo!
Irving Berlin did more than any composer to Americanize Jewish aspirations.
Someday I'm going to murder the bugler. Someday they're going to find him dead.
To understand Berlin is to understand the Hollywood moguls. Another cantor's son, he started life in the midst of pogroms.
My life in bed.
Oh, how I hate to get up in the morning. Oh, how I love to remain in bed.
Berlin was a Russian immigrant who would go on to write the quintessential American songs. He's a kind of Cyrano de Bergerac. In the foreground is Fred Astaire, the embodiment of American aristocracy, full of grace and upperclassmanship. In the background, the person writing the music and the lyrics is this little Jewish guy. For over 60 years, he tried to reinvent himself. In the process, he infused life into a whole new American ideal.
In the White House, President Eisenhower signs a bill authorizing a gold medal for composer Irving Berlin. It honors him for writing God Bless America and other patriotic songs. For Irving Berlin, this marks another milestone in his rise from humble beginnings to a place of highest esteem the world over.
I don't know if anything could possibly have happened that touches me as deeply as this medal. God Bless America isn't just a song that I wrote, but it expresses my gratitude for the opportunities and the freedom to write that song and to the country that inspired it. Thank you very much.
Along with the unofficial anthem of the United States, Irving Berlin wrote the American classics Easter Parade and that most Jewish of Yuletide fantasies, White Christmas. Louis B. Mayer not only celebrated Christmas, he appropriated America's birthday as his own. Mayer claimed that he couldn't remember his real birthday, so he celebrated it on the 4th of July.
When I think of Grandpa, I think of these amazing events that were held every year that I was privileged to attend. Patriotism was an important theme in his life, and so he selected Independence Day as his birthday. And in the studio commissary, every star under contract was not only invited, but virtually obliged to show up. And these extraordinary events, which, as I began to become educated and read about European royalty, seemed to me, in retrospect, more and more like events held by heads of state. He wrapped himself in the American flag and said, "That's me."
In Hollywood, they joked that the moguls went from Poland to polo in just one generation. They held Easter egg hunts and Christmas parties. Some of them sent their children to Catholic schools. Their efforts to reinvent themselves seemed boundless. They even hid their Jewishness from their children and grandchildren.
I didn't know I was Jewish till I was at least 7, I think. I remember we were in Scarsdale, and I was going to public school, and my mother said, in case somebody asks you what your religion is, you're Jewish. And I said, okay, I don't think I even asked, well, what's that,
I was brought up by Catholic governesses who took me to the Catholic churches, and I learned prayers in French, and I wore a cross.
And did you become Catholic?
No, it's just that I didn't know anything about the Jewish religion. I didn't know what it was.
I realized that my father had never told me anecdotes about the old country, that I didn't even know what his real name was. I didn't know the little village that he came from. I knew nothing about his life. And I realized that the name Warner was probably not correct, but I thought being Polish it might have been Werner. To this day, I really don't know what our original name was.
Often the first thing to go was the Jewish name. The Hollywood Jews were obsessed with erasing anything Jewish in their films, their lives, and the lives of their stars.
Do you know what her name is? Esther Victoria Blodgett.
We'll have to do something about that right away. Let's see, Esther Victoria, Vicky. How about Vicky?
Oh, I think that's terribly cute.
Let's see, Vicky. Vicky what?
Vicky, pronounced Vicky.
See, Esther, Hester, Dester, Lester. Vicky Lester.
Oh, I like that.
Say it.
Vicky Lester.
Say it again.
Vicky Lester.
Say it again.
Vicky Lester.
Say it.
Vicky Lester.
Say Vicky Lester. Vicky Lester.
Vicky Lester.
Vicky Lester.
Vicky Lester.
Theodosia Goodman became Theda Bara. Sophia Kosso became Sylvia Sidney. Isser Danielovich Dembski became Kirk Douglas. Leo Jacobi became Lee J. Cobb. Shirley Shrift became Shelley Winters. Bernard Schwartz became Tony Curtis. David Kaminsky became Danny Kaye. Edward Iskovitz became Eddie Cantor. Melvin Hesselberg became Melvin Douglas. Muni Wiesenfreund, a star of the Yiddish Theater, became Paul Muni. Emmanuel Goldenberg became Edward G. Robinson. The G was a reminder of who he really was. Nice Jewish girls, such as Lily Palmer, Julie Holliday, and Lauren Bacall, or Betty Persky, helped to define the American woman. Not all the Jewish talent went to Hollywood to assimilate. There were over 50 non-Hollywood Yiddish films produced in New York before the Second World War.
Trouble, trouble, wird Hecher breite. Da lebt das Theatersachen bei, es helft kein Weinen, kein Geschrei. Trouble hat größer in der Kleine. A jeder dreht sich Hand in Kuhn.
These films were the flip side of the Hollywood movies. They parodied Hollywood's optimism and Fred Astaire's top hat gentility. Many who could have gone to Hollywood stayed in New York to make films that expressed their Jewish identity.
These films were shown to an audience which was almost entirely made up of immigrants and sometimes the children of immigrants, and these films by and large had a very, very different point of view than Hollywood movies. I mean, the Yiddish movies were kind of fighting a rearguard action to protect certain forms of Jewish cultural expression against the sort of overwhelming, seductive power of the larger American culture.
In this classic of Yiddish cinema, a great cantor, played by Moshe Oisher, is drawn into the secular world of opera. On the night of his operatic debut, he learns of his son's death. Unable to perform, he returns to his synagogue to lead the high holiday prayers. Heartbroken, he dies. Here the attempt to reconcile Jewish and secular worlds ends tragically.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing yet. Goodbye. Don't cry.
Warner Brothers' The Jazz Singer was a revolutionary silent film that broke into sound with each musical number. Here, as in the Yiddish film, a cantor's son, played by Al Jolson, who was in real life a cantor's son, has to choose between American fame and Jewish loyalty. At first, the cantor's son seems to choose Judaism. But in assimilationist Hollywood, the story could not end there. Hollywood had to have a Hollywood ending.
Mammy.
Here, Dad and his old Jewish ways are dead, while the hero in American blackface sings triumphantly with his Gentile girlfriend waiting in the wings.
Where can you
Again and again in Hollywood films, the old world father is rejected, the mother is idealized, and the rebellious son sails on to glory.
I don't want you to go.
Mom, why can't I go someplace and study to be a doctor?
Oh, Jason, it takes too long, and we haven't any money.
Money? Well, we won't get any richer if I stay here. Pop's a failure, and you know it.
Jason, don't you dare.
There's a boat going up the river tomorrow, and I'm going to take it.
Well, I think America turned out to be what my grandfather imagined it to be. There was no romanticism involved. I mean, you can say it was a romantic idea that a poor guy with $19 sewn in his pocket could found an industry. I mean, that's a very romantic idea, but it turned out to be true. So, in a sense, he was a realist.
Son, dear, feel this.
It's all stiff.
I sewed a few dollars in the lining, in case you need it.
Oh, Mom.
Jason, don't feel unkindly toward your father. Everything he did, everything he's ever done, was meant for your own good.
Oh, please, Mom. Don't cry. Don't cry. Someday I'm coming home with my pockets loaded with money. Honest I will, Mom. You'll see. All aboard!
We're in the money. We're in the money. We've got a lot of what it takes to get along. We're in the money. The sky is sunny.
They had left the old world penniless, and in less than 20 years they had become the highest paid executives in America. In fact, for almost a decade, Mayer was the highest salaried man in the world. At this point, they might have concluded that their transformation from Eastern European Jews into Americans was complete. But history intervened to remind them of their origins. It was difficult for the Moguls to entirely abandon their Jewishness while the Nazis were persecuting their European kin. Some of the Hollywood Jews could not ignore these events. In 1939, a group of stars, including John Garfield, Edward G. Robinson, and their spokesman, Melvin Douglas, risked their celebrity status to speak out against Hitler.
That all economic connections between the United States of America and Nazi Germany be totally severed, until such time as Germany is willing to re-enter the family of nations in accordance with the humane principles of international law.
Though Carl Laemmle was no longer studio head at this time, he joined the protesters and signed their declaration. Both Laemmle and Harry Warner were active in sponsoring Jewish refugees from Europe. And in 1939, Warner made this anti-fascist speech to the American Legion.
Drive them out. Make America unsafe for those who seek to tear down what others have built through the generations since 1776. Drive them from their secret meeting places. Destroy their insidious propaganda machines. Drive out their Bunds and their leagues, their clans and black legions, the silver shirts, the black shirts, and the dirty shirts. Help keep America for those who believe in America.
In response to Hollywood's limited anti-fascist stand, former U.S. Ambassador to Britain, Joseph P. Kennedy, flew to Los Angeles. At a secret meeting, he told the Moguls that American Jews would be blamed if the United States were dragged into war with Germany. He warned them to stop agitating against Nazism. The Kennedy meeting had its desired effect.
At the end of the 1930s, as the shadows of war are haunting Europe, the Jews in Hollywood are very much afraid of warning American audiences of those dangers because it looks as though it's a special Jewish angle. It looks parochial, it looks limited, and therefore it's difficult to make anti-Nazi movies in Hollywood because the Jews don't want to stand out.
The Jewish fear of standing out was expressed through another icon that would make its way to the screen.
Superman was invented by two Jewish kids in the late 1930s, when there also was a worldwide upsurge in very frightening anti-Semitism. Superman is discovered like Moses in the bulrushes. He's an immigrant from another planet who comes to Earth. He has his identity as a mild-mannered intellectual, but really underneath he's the man of steel. I think that's a very suggestive Jewish fantasy. It's almost as if he's passing all the time.
While the Jew felt like an alien in America, Superman was a real alien.
This looks like a job for Superman.
Yet incredibly, he is the only superhero who manages to keep his identity secret without wearing a mask. Only Jews could have created a story based on the premise that all one needs is a Gentile demeanor to hide in plain sight.
I bet you recognize him. Why, of course you recognize him. It's Adenoid Hinkle, the Fooey of Tomania.
Like Superman, the Hollywood moguls were unwilling to risk their Gentile disguise. As a result, only 2 anti-Nazi films were made before the war. Charlie Chaplin financed and made the classic film The Great Dictator. Chaplin was neither Jewish nor American, so he didn't share the fears of the Hollywood Jews. Warner Brothers made Confessions of a Nazi Spy only after their Jewish representative in Germany was beaten to death by Hitler's henchmen. Incredibly, this Hollywood film about the dangers of Nazism makes no reference to either Jews or anti-Semitism. All this changed on December the 7th, 1941, with the attack on the U.S. Navy at Pearl Harbor by Hitler's Japanese allies. Now, instead of telling Hollywood to keep quiet, the U.S. government began pushing them to fulfill their duty and make patriotic war movies.
All that noise you hear isn't static. It's death coming to London. Yes, they're coming here now. You can hear the bombs falling on the streets and the homes. Don't tune me out. Hang on a while. This is a big story, and you're part of it. It's too late to do anything here now except stand in the dark and let them come. It's as if the lights were all out everywhere, except in America. Keep those lights burning. Cover them with steel. Bring them with guns. Build a canopy of battleships and bombing planes around them. Hello, America. Hang on to your
It's a wonderful time for the Hollywood Jews. I mean, here were a group of Jews who had spent their lives seeking legitimacy and seeking to be embraced by America. And World War II finally affords them that opportunity to be embraced officially. They are now real patriots.
Will you check with MGM and see if they'll postpone the Hedy Lamarr picture so we can use her for the bond drive? Surely. RKO just okayed Cary Grant. We'll hear from Paramount later today on Colbert and Dick Powell. Oh, swell. Double check with Boyer and Abbott and Costello, will you? Right away, yeah.
The priority on Irene Dunn has just come through. She'll leave on the 16th.
Fine, fine.
The motion picture industry today is supplying without charge all its newest and best feature films to the U.S. War Department Overseas Film Division.
The movies were a tremendous propagandistic tool during this time. They set up camps for the soldiers to come back in where movies were shown 24 hours a day because that impressed the soldiers with what they were fighting for.
It was the beginning of an unprecedented alliance between Washington and Hollywood.
And you swear that you will bear true faith and allegiance to the United States of America? I do.
For the first time, Hollywood's message was adopted by the government. A democratic state could not send minorities, immigrants, and the poor to die for an America which excluded them. So, if the enemies were fascist, the American army had to be portrayed as caring and sharing.
I want you to feel free to ask questions, even embarrassing ones. Come to me with suggestions. We're going to be more than officers and men in this. We're going to be comrades. What I eat, you will eat. Where I sleep, you will sleep. I will take you into my confidence whenever it's possible before going into battle. We'll have a meeting in which I'll explain our plans and objectives so that each of you can make a more intelligent contribution to the result. Afterward, we'll have another meeting to criticize the way in which the operation was conducted. We'll fight and endure and win together.
You would have equal opportunity foxholes. If you go back and look at those movies, there was always one Jewish character who was never presented as Jewish, but he was Cohen or Schwartz from Brooklyn. There was always one black character, too.
Wesley Epps, Private, 3rd Engineer Battalion.
The American Army during the Second World War was not integrated except in Hollywood movies. And the Office of War Information was very eager to keep our enemies from making capital out of any sort of problems in America. So they didn't want movies that had any racial tensions of any sort.
Corporal Jake Feingold, 4th Chemical Company, USA.
While 6 million Jews died in Europe, their
film industry. The committee is seeking to determine if Red Party members have reached the screen with subversive propaganda.
To the mogul's surprise, powerful men in Washington saw Hollywood's patriotism as nothing more than thinly disguised communism. Now, at the height of their success, the Hollywood Jews watched their dream fall apart. While economic factors played a role in their demise, it was the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, which really brought them down.
This committee, under its mandate from the House of Representatives, has the responsibility of exposing and spotlighting subversive elements wherever they may exist. That communists have made such an attempt in Hollywood, and with considerable success, is already evident.
With the advent of the Cold War, HUAC began persecuting Hollywood for the populist and pro-Soviet films the Roosevelt administration encouraged Hollywood to make during the Second World War.
Did you cook this dinner?
I did.
But you're a pianist. How can you let her do such work?
How can I let her? The question is, how can I stop her?
I would not be happy here on the farm if I did not do my share of the work.
No, but is it necessary that you drive a tractor?
It is a privilege to drive the tractor.
The committee is determined that the hearing shall be fair and impartial. We have subpoenaed witnesses representing both sides of the question. All we are after are the facts.
I should like to see what you have.
First came the mostly Jewish Hollywood talent, who stood up to HUAC.
Are you a member of the Communist Party? Next, you are going to ask what my religious beliefs are, and you are going to insist before various members of the industry that since you don't like my religious beliefs, I should not work in that industry.
There became an identification in people's minds with the things that went together: intellectuals, Jews, Russians, communists. If you look back at any of the depictions of what communists were, all of these things kind of get merged together in the public imagination.
The chairman of the committee, at the time that it initiated its investigation of Hollywood, was a vicious anti-Semite from Mississippi by the name of John Rankin. And Rankin said on the floor of Congress, I'm just going to read an excerpt from a speech he gave. He said, "Communism is the most dangerous influence in the world today. I am talking about the communism of Leon Trotsky," of course he mentions a Jew, "that is based upon hatred for Christianity." You know that communism. Remember that communism and Christianity can never live in the same atmosphere. Communism is older than Christianity. This is a revision of history, since Karl Marx, to most people's knowledge, is the one who created communism. But this communism, which is clearly a euphemism for Judaism, is older than Christianity. It is the curse of the ages. It hounded and persecuted the Savior during his earthly ministry, inspired his crucifixion, derided him in his dying agony, and then gambled for his garments at the foot of the cross.
But we are today in a deadly conflict between those two ideologies. And there can be no compromise.
Mr. Rankin,
in this country.
I hope that you're not impugning in any way the American activities of the motion picture employers in Hollywood.
I am some of them, I'll say.
Well, I want to tell you right now that there is no group of more American people in the country than are those in Hollywood. Well, I want to tell you some of the things they're doing.
Well, I know some of the things they're doing, and I know some of the things they're doing that probably you don't know. But I can tell you now, you need a house cleaning, and they need it very badly.
The question of communism is in no way related to this inquiry, which is an attempt to get control of the screen and to invade the basic rights of American citizens. Mr. Chairman. Historically denied to any committee of this sort to invade the rights and privileges and immunities of American citizens, whether they be Protestant or Methodist or Jewish or Catholic, whether they will compromise or leave my affiliation with the American public, and they will know where I stand, as they do from what I have written. Stand away from the stand. For Americanism for many years, and I stand away from the stand. Are you
Party. Have you ever been a member of the Communist Party?
Your purpose is to use this to disrupt the motion picture industry, to invade the right not only of me, but of the producers to their thoughts, to their opinions. And this I will not permit.
The President of the United States said that anti-communism was American policy. And that scared the shit out of them, because the last thing they wanted to be called was un-American. Having flirted with the idea of being Americans for so long, they began to believe that possibly they were.
I'm just hopeful, like I told you, Mr. Smith, in California, that perhaps out of this hearing, our Congress...
Now came the moguls, who were out to prove their American patriotism.
...question to give us a policy how to handle American citizens who don't deserve to be if they are communists, to get them out of our place.
Ideological terms, termites have burrowed into many American industries, organizations, and societies. Wherever they may be, I say let us dig them out and get rid of them. My brothers and I will be happy to subscribe generously to a pest removal fund. We are willing to establish such a fund to ship to Russia the people who don't like our American system of government and prefer the communistic system to ours.
Then you admit that there are or were communists or communist sympathizers in your own industry.
I don't know if they're communist sympathizers. I know they're un-American in their method.
In your studio, you mean?
In our studio.
Well, how do you mean un-American because they are communists, or un-American because they're fascists?
No, un-American because they endeavor to put certain things into scripts that, in my personal opinion, is un-American, and it's my business to see that it doesn't get in. If it eventually does creep in, I cut it out.
Well, there's very little difference, so whether a person is a communist or a fascist, so long as he's un-American. Isn't that true?
I am not qualified to answer
but
that.
You admit, though, there are some people in your studio that are un-American.
Yes, I admit that.
The way the moguls buckled was the Cossacks are coming again. They were unsure of their status, a lot more unsure, say, than the next generation of who were writers, say, or directors or actors, who were born in America, and as I was, and had no confusion at all about being Americans. We were Americans and felt we had all the rights of Americans, and would fight for them when we could.
I am against. I'm for everything that you said.
So you agree with that statement?
I agree wholeheartedly, and
The statement was a little long, and
it was a very good statement. It's a statement of a real American.
To appease UAC, the moguls instituted a blacklist of studio talent. Years before, they had fled European anti-Semitism, but now in America, they became collaborators, helping anti-Semites rid Hollywood of Jewish intellectuals. In effect, they had surrendered control of the industry.
If you look at the main factors in what caused the moguls' decline,